Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please find your seats, we'll begin in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Destin City Council for May 1, 2017 to order, please. Reverend Barry Carpenter, Destin United Methodist Church. If I could ask the audience to please stand, we're going to have a moment of silence, please. Mr. Marler, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's see, among our distinguished guests in the audience tonight, we have Boy Scouts from Troop 504 of the Methodist Church. They're working on their citizenship merit badge, if I've been informed correctly. So I hope you learned something tonight. We'll begin with a couple of proclamations. For more than 35 years, the American Water Works Association and its members have celebrated Drinking Water Week, a unique opportunity for both water professionals and the community they serve to join together in recognizing the vital role water plays in our daily lives. I'd like to present a proclamation to the Destin Water Users, Inc., the water service provider for our area. I see Mr. Lockwood Warnett is near the front. If I can get you to meet me at the podium. Whereas water is our most valuable natural resource, we are all stewards of the water infrastructure upon which future generations depend. And whereas only tap water delivers public health protection, fire protection, support for our economy, and the quality of life we enjoy. And whereas any measure of a successful society, low mortality rates, economic growth and diversity, productivity, and public safety are in some way related to access to safe water. And whereas Destin Water Users, Inc. is the water service provider for our area, whereas each citizen of our city is called upon to help protect our source waters from pollution, practice water conservation, and to get involved in local water issues by getting to know their water. Now therefore, I, Scott Fisher, on behalf of the Destin City Council, do hereby proclaim May 7 through 13, 2017 as Drinking Water Week of the City of Destin. So done this first day of May 2017. And we are grateful for the great water you send us. You have a few comments you'd like to make?
Destin Water Users has been a part of the community since 1963, and we're proud to be able to say that we have a plenty supply to help us through build out, and we are a member-owned utility cooperative. So all of you are part of the Destin Water Users team that make this a successful operation and provide safe, clean drinking water for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoops, wait a minute.
Next, I have a proclamation for Building Safety Month. We want to recognize the critical role officials play in developing and applying building standards to ensure the safety of our citizens. Could I ask Karen Haynes to come forward and receive the proclamation? Whereas the City of Destin is committed to recognizing our growth and strength depends on the safety and economic value of the homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serve our citizens, both in everyday life and in times of natural disaster. And whereas vigilant guardians, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, and others in the construction industry work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. These dedicated members of the International Code Council develop and implement the highest quality codes to protect Americans in the buildings where we live, learn, work, and play. Whereas the international codes, the most widely adopted building safety and fire prevention codes in the nation, are used by most U.S. cities, counties, and states. These modern building safety codes also include safeguards to protect the public from natural disasters such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wildfires, and earthquakes. Whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown guardians of public safety, our local code officials who assure us of safe, efficient, and livable buildings that are essential to keep America great. And whereas code officials, partners in safety, in community safety, and economic growth, the theme for Building Safety Month 2017 encourages all Americans to raise awareness of the importance of building safe, resilient construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, and new technologies in the construction industries. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Scott Fisher, on behalf of the Destin City Council, do hereby proclaim the month May 2017 as Building Safety Month. Accordingly, our citizens are encouraged to join communities across America to participate in Building Safety Month activities. So done this first day of May 2017. Council members, I believe you've had an opportunity to look at the minutes. If there's a motion for approval or changes or comments.
Second.
I have a motion. I have a second. Any discussion? If not, I call the vote. Unanimous, yes. We have the second reading of the ordinance vacating a portion of the Pine Street public right-of-way. Mr. Burns, would you read by title?
Ordinance number 17-05-CN, an ordinance of the City of Destin, Florida, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for abandonment of the northerly .156 acre segment of Pine Street right-of-way, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. And we're here on a quasi-judicial hearing that was initiated by an applicant. And could they please stand? And sir, could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. Okay. And is anyone from the city going to be testifying? Mr. Campbell, do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. And does anyone from the public intend on testifying under oath today? If so, could you please stand? All right, seeing that no one from the public will be testifying, we'll open up the hearing to the applicant to provide an explanation.
My name's Tim Shores. My address is 159 Calhoun Avenue. My engineer told me that I was going to have to sit here tonight and that it was going to be the same as the last meeting. So we bought the property on Pine Street and developed it and divided it into lots. And in the process of that, we built 4 houses. We also remodeled one on the corner and on the corner of Calhoun and Pine. What we did was we had poured some driveways that were, we have a 20-foot driveway in the front, and we went up to the property line. The purpose of the vacation was we had an issue with communication between us and the city regarding surface of the driveway. So this was city initiated by suggestion by Ashley Grana, who's no longer with you, and Mr. Schmidt in a meeting with me, that I apply for this vacation to solve a parking problem. So that's the purpose of it.
Thank you. Questions? Comments?
Mr. Campbell?
I'll go ahead and take this. This is, oh, you do have it.
This request is to vacate the northern 20 feet of a portion of Pine Street. The right-of-way, currently there's a 100-foot right-of-way. The city land development code requires that only collector roads have a 100-foot right-of-way. This is a residential street. So we reviewed, Public Services reviewed the request and could find that it was consistent with their land development code and comprehensive plan. This was taken to the LPA, and the LPA must review for 4 items. The requested vacation is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The LPA found that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The right-of-way does not provide the sole access to any property. Remaining access shall not be an easement. The staff review accesses only to the adjoining property. No easement is required for ingress and egress. Number 3, the vacation would not jeopardize the current or future location of any utility. All of the utility agencies have submitted clearance letters identifying no significant impact or have requested easements from the applicant as a result of this vacation. And finally, number 4, the proposed vacation is not detrimental to the public interest. And upon staff review, staff found that the request is not detrimental to the public interest. These findings were taken to the LPA, and the local planning agency recommends approval of this request to vacate, abandon, discontinue, and close a portion of Pine Street right-of-way based on findings that the request satisfies all 4 requirements identified in the Land Development Code, Section 8.0100D. And that's a report from staff.
I just have one correction, sir. Although it was a member of staff that suggested this course of action, this was a owner-initiated application, not a city-initiated application.
Any questions of the applicant? This is a public hearing, so I didn't ask the public if they had any comments they would like to make at this time.
Well, Mayor, we'll go and we'll close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and now you can ask for any
Yes.
public comments.
Okay, yeah, evidentiary area is closed. Public comments? You can sit down if you'd like. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Michael Williams, 312 Calhoun. I'm on the corner of Calhoun and Pine. And although this was an owner-initiated project initially with the development of a few houses along Pine Street along that section at once was infested with 4 mobile homes that were a lot of trouble for Okaloosa law enforcement. As the owner on the corner of Pine and Calhoun, the abandonment would not affect me, otherwise it will give us that extra property. Well, we spent weeks clearing debris, sofas, boat parts, and junk out of there and have improved that property. Every one of you guys that have been by there know, you can take a look. And regardless, I think it's a very positive influence on the area. The right-of-way, as described, was super wide, limited traffic through that area, maybe 25, 30 cars in a day. We really appreciate your consideration in us helping to do a small part to rejuvenate in a positive way that part of Destin, and looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Not seeing any, we'll close and move to council. Councilmember Braden.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I'm going to make the recommend motion. It is moved that the City Council approve ordinance 17-05CN on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Open for discussion by council. Councilmember Foreman.
I was going to make a motion, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Dixon.
I was going to make the motion as Mayor.
Councilmember Ramsville.
Thank you. I do have a question. For clarification's sake, on page 63 in our packet, it's a notice from Corporation Service Company dated December 28th, 2004, and it's noted as being a withdrawal of authority. And I'm just wondering why a document from '04 is included. Is that perhaps because it is a line that is no longer used, or why do we have something from '04 in here?
That would be that the utility is no longer in use there by that company.
Thanks.
Mr. Foreman, your light's back on. Was that an accident? Your light's back on. Was that request? Okay. I turned it off. Look, it's back on. Don't touch that button. I see no further discussion. We have a motion, we have a second. I'm going to call for the vote. Unanimous, yes. With first reading of ordinance 1625 LC, providing for regulations of certain potable restroom facilities. Should I go to the public hearing first on this, or? Go ahead.
Ordinance number 16-25-LC, an ordinance of the City of Destin, Florida relating to placement of portable restroom facilities, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for an amendment to Land Development Code Section 3.00.01, definitions, providing for incorporation into the Land Development Code, providing for conflicting provisions, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. And we're here on the first reading, and it's a quasi-legislative hearing.
Ms. Lejeune, would you?
Yes, sir. The purpose of this proposed ordinance is to provide some regulatory authority for the city to rely upon when an atypical portable toilet situation occur. Because portable toilets are very well regulated by the Okaloosa County Health Department from a public health aspect, the city's intent is to ensure only that portable toilets are located appropriately in conformance with the LDC. Under this ordinance, portable toilets would be allowed through a construction permit or through a special event permit.
Again, this is a public hearing. It's open to any member of the public who would like to speak. I do have a card from Marcy Bell to start us off.
A copy needs to be provided to the clerk as well.
The clerk already actually has a copy, because those are the same ones that I sent to LPA. It should be now. Marcy Bell, 3 Gulf Breeze Court, Destin, Holiday Isle. So they're each addressed as A, B, and C in the top right-hand corner. I'll get to those pictures in just a moment, but I'd like each of you to take a moment and think about where you live, how long you've lived there, a year, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. You have a vacant lot across the street from your house. Someone comes in, buys that property, and decides that they want to do something with it. The things they start talking about wanting to do, in your mind you think, I don't think that's allowed. So you start investigating, you start questioning, you go to the city council, you go to the Corps of Engineers, and you start investigating and you speak out publicly. You are threatened with a portable toilet and an intimidation factor, as an intimidation factor for you to stop talking. I'm actually here because Diana Monson cannot be here. She's in Houston this evening. So I'm here speaking on her behalf. So let me gather my thoughts. I apologize. So the toilet was put out there. That could happen to you. Could happen to any one of you. Could happen to me. I have a vacant lot across the street from my house. Not there temporarily. There's a spite toilet. The toilet's placed there. It was cleaned. Very rarely cleaned. I actually was at Diana's house one afternoon when a mother and her young child walked up to the toilet, opened it up, and she quickly closed it because the stench was so bad. It was placed there in July and didn't leave until September. She proceeded to step outside the toilet, and her child did their business with their towels around them. They were from the Emerald Grand. How do I know they were from the Emerald Grand? Because the towels that they used...
Excuse me, Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was just wondering the relevance to the first hearing for the portable toilets.
That's okay, I'll get there, I apologize. Anyways,
Yeah.
so my point being is that the portable toilet was set there. I appreciate the fact that you've let me speak here, but I just want to let you know that there was a magistrate hearing in reference to this, and picture A is the only picture that the magistrate saw, and it's a nice picture from the toilet out to the beach. The magistrate never saw B or C, and the placement of that toilet was at the front of someone's home who publicly speaks out.
We really empathize with this particular situation, but that's not really the point. The city is attempting to develop a regulation to regulate all
That's fine.
portable toilets.
It's just
in
my
the city.
public comment.
Not specifically this law.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Close the public comments, move to council. Council members? Oh, I still have the timer up. Councilmember Ramsell.
I do have discussion, but I will make the recommended motion, if I can find it, because it seems to have moved. Is it 1625 LC? Perfect. That's the one I've got. I move that the City Council approve proposed ordinance 16-25-LC,
on first reading and direct staff to schedule said ordinance for final adoption on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Discussion? Councilmember Ramsel?
Thanks. I just have a question. On page 68 in our packet, where it is discussing at the very bottom portable restrooms, it's like a definition. Does construction need to be defined or better clarified?
Are you talking about the definition of portable restrooms?
Yes, at the very bottom of the page, one of the lines says,
If permitted by the city for temporary use during a construction project?
right, do we need to more specifically define construction project, or is it all encompassing?
I think it's all encompassing. Unless the council doesn't feel it's clear, we can try to clarify it further. But I think it is.
Okay, that's all I had.
Okay.
Councilmember Marlar?
The thing I'm wondering about is, now, are we talking just the single porta potties, or are we talking like the trailers that they bring in? I mean, I think I talked to Ms. Top
This is
about it
intended
earlier.
for the single porta potties, the movable, what you think of when you hear the term porta potty. It's not covering trailers. Those are covered elsewhere in the land development code.
Okay, because my question goes to the fact we just passed a livery ordinance, and we're updating that tonight for restrooms, and if they're required to put those restrooms on their property, if they are in the construction phase and they have to I think we start in June with this, then I just wanted to make sure that they were allowed to bring in like a trailer, not just a separate porta potty, because they make the trailers that have several bathrooms in them.
Well, if it's during a construction, they'd be allowed to have a porta potty if they got a permit. The construction trailers wouldn't be covered under this permit. They have separate permitting under the code for those.
Okay.
Any further discussion, comments? If not, I call for the vote.
Mr. Mayor,
Sorry.
for certain reasons, I'm abstaining from this vote.
Okay. Six yes, one abstain. Passes. This is the public opportunity to speak portion of our program. This will be for items 6 through 8, 19 through 22A. I have a number of cards, and I would like to call on Mr. Peterson first. Excuse me, Miss.
Hello again. I'm going to talk on item number 8. It's the Resolution 1724, City Council Meeting Procedures. I spoke on this last time, and I've been kind of racking my brain because I said I would try to come back with more ideas. And one thing that just kind of crossed my mind on the way home from the last meeting was I really applaud the council's enthusiasm to take on as many large, complex, possibly lengthy discussion items as you do, and I know that that's a really tricky balance, but I just did quick math. If we have an agenda that has 20 items on it, which I don't really know when the last time I saw less than 20, 10 minutes apiece, which we know is very rare for a lot of items, we're already looking at 3 hours and 20 minutes of discussion. I don't know, perhaps there's a solution in there to limit the number of items, or at least reduce the number of items that have such...
This section of the program is for these items that are listed on the agenda, not general discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, it said number 8. Public opportunity number 8. Was that not me?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought it was, am I okay? Okay, so I was just gonna bring up, that's one possible thing, is maybe space out what you know are gonna, because you kind of know what's gonna have a lot of discussion behind it and what people feel really passionate about, which is hard to do, because I know you guys really want to be aggressive on taking on a lot of really big issues, which is commendable. but you're up against a big clock. If you're going to spend 10 minutes on 20 items, you're at 3 hours and 20 minutes already. So, and we know that that's pretty rare for a lot of those big items. They go on a lot longer than that. So I know that Mr. Destin mentioned that a lot of it's self-regulation, which is also very difficult. I haven't come up with any other better ideas than that. I was hoping that I would, but I'm sorry. That's the best that I've got to add to what I spoke on last time. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm having a little trouble reading some of these. Is it John Stevens?
Good evening, Council. John Stevens, 1122 Bay Court. This is in reference to the library bathrooms, I think item 20. So currently right let me get my thoughts. So right now I'm two separate parcels. So therefore I have to have two different bathrooms, even though they're adjacent. Now let's say if it's two separate parcels, one property owner, shouldn't you only be able to have one bathroom instead of two separate bathrooms? That's my only thought. All right, appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Leah Moore?
Good evening. Lee Moore, representing Howard Group. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to speak tonight about the temporary tree cutting moratorium that's on the agenda, item 21, I believe. Howard Group is a big supporter of this, clearly. We've said that before and hope that this goes through and goes through as quickly as possible. One comment and one question. Under the exceptions in Section 2, number 5, it says that a homesteaded single-family property occupied by the owner is accepted. And we just strongly recommend that you consider not accepting those properties. Many of the trees that are being cut throughout the city are happening in those types of situations, and that's having a tremendous impact on the tree canopy. I think of single-family homesteaded properties that have to comply with many other regulations, whether it's setbacks or height restrictions or parking requirements or many others, some of them even the protection of natural resources if they're near a body of water. So if this is to protect our natural resources, which we consider that it is, it seems that this would apply just like any other regulation would. And so we strongly encourage that to not be an exception to the moratorium. And then the other, it's kind of a comment/question under Section 4 penalties. After reading this, it's not completely clear to me what the penalties really are specifically. There are some different general statements about potential penalties and methods of enforcement, but it doesn't seem clear what those penalties are. So just would ask for some clarification on that. But we're excited about the moratorium and the ordinance hopefully to follow soon for tree protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan French?
Hello, I'm Alan French, 50 Lands End Drive, and I'm also representing Trees on the Coast, a nonprofit that is desperately trying to get more trees, protect trees, and educate. I just want to say and commend y'all as a city council for directing the tree board, who has done a phenomenal job in creating this tree ordinance, to follow it through to the end. The vision y'all have to do this is unbelievable. It's a great thing you're doing, and I look at these live oaks that are 200 years old, and if you think about it, they are just as much a treasure for our city as our white sand beaches. They're just different, but I implore y'all to don't let people bully you or try to tell you, well, it's my property, because just like Ms. Moore just said, you can't buy a piece of property and put a strip club next to your next door neighbor, because there's regulations against things like that. So this is just like any other regulation. It's not really hurting people. It's just helping our city as a whole, improving our property values. And thank you all very much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Shane Moody.
Shane Moody, President and CEO of the Destin Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here to talk about item 22A, which is the sales tax that is going to come up, the half-cent sales tax later on. I'm not here to give the Chamber support or opposition to the sales tax because we don't have a position on it. We do feel that a sales tax is a very realistic and probably the best way to fund projects. But I do want to clear one thing up. The story in the newspaper Saturday was a little misleading with one of the comments that said that late last year, local chambers of commerce and other groups led initiatives for 2 separate half-cent sales taxes that they said would help pay for county and school district infrastructure projects. We were not one of those chambers. We were involved in the discussions and we were involved in the meetings, but we neither supported nor opposed. The reason being that we had asked on multiple occasions to see a laundry list and a punch list of projects that the money was going to fund. No one would ever provide that to us. So we remained out of the decision making on that. We felt at the time we couldn't support a tax that didn't have a list of projects attached to it. We didn't think that that was a good idea, especially for the Destin community who had in consecutive elections voted down the Destin Fire Control District's efforts to up their millage cap. We just felt that there was an anti-tax mindset at the time, and without a list of projects, we could not support that. We also understand that the city will receive a portion of the tax from the state, but we'd encourage you to know what projects will be funded by the remainder of the tax that's left over. Destin will generate, if not a majority of the tax, very close to half of the tax, and we need to be sure that there are partnerships so that projects directly affect us on the coast and in Destin. And as I stated earlier, I'm not here to offer support or opposition to the tax. I just wanted to point those things out and clear up the statement in the newspaper that we were not one of the chambers that was supporting the tax last year. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll end the public comment section and move to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt or pull this out? Yep. Motion?
Second.
And a second. No discussion. I call for the vote. Unanimous, yes. Under resolutions, we will start with the Disaster Recovery Services resolution. Ms. Lejeune, explanation.
Yes, sir, I'm going to let Mr. David Campbell do this item.
This is a follow-up item from one we had last meeting, where we adopted a resolution to adopt the federal procurement requirements. So when a disaster occurs, that we are in a position to apply for federal aid from FEMA. And this item applies to our continuing service provider, Crowder Gulf, who are our disaster assistance contractor. And so this is the same type resolution, but this will also apply to Crowder Gulf. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Councilmember Morgan.
I move that City Council formally adopt Resolution 17-20 approving Amendment 1 to the Agreement for Disaster Recovery Services with Crowder Gulf Joint Venture, Inc. authorizing a renewal and extension of said agreement through June 30, 2018, and further designates and confirms Carice Lejeune, City Manager, to execute and deliver said agreements and any related documents necessary to consummate the agreement and contract extension.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion or comment? Not seeing any, I'll call for the vote. Unanimous, yes. Next, we have Resolution 1724, the City Council meeting procedures. Ms. Lejeune?
Yes, sir. So we had brought back a draft revised format for our council agenda meetings at the last meeting, and we asked for feedback from this council, which we then incorporated into a new format for how we conduct the city council meetings. What we are hoping for is that this will allow for a smooth flow of information, create an efficient process for this council to consider and craft policy decisions. If you would like to look at the actual document itself, it is on, let me get to the page. Okay, so on page 95, we have the format for the proposed new council meeting agenda. And as I had talked about last time, we would start out with the agenda approval portion, which would allow council at that time to put items that needed immediate attention on the agenda that perhaps were not available or we had not identified prior to our closing of the agenda for publishing, which happens on Wednesday afternoon prior to the meeting. After the approval of minutes, then we would have an opportunity for all of the proclamations, recognitions, special presentations, and announcements to happen, allowing people who are here for only that particular reason to conduct business and then have the opportunity to leave the council meeting, followed by the public comments on any agenda items except for the public hearings. The third item would be the city manager report. That would allow me in a timely portion of the agenda to provide information to citizens so that we have an audience that everybody would be able to hear. Also, those items brought forward as staff reports that are of particular interest to the council that we need further explanation or discussion, as well as any follow-up items that the council had directed myself or staff to investigate, research, and bring back for discussion. The next one would be the first reading of ordinances that do not require a public hearing, followed by the actual public hearing items. After that, we would have the consent agenda, followed by the informational comments or presentations from council, and then comments from the public that are on any matter that was not on the agenda. So at this time, we will entertain any questions. Council can accept or reject this new format as they wish.
Questions, discussion? Mr. Foreman?
I've looked over the the resolution and the format that's been prescribed to us, and I think it's a move in the right direction. I don't know for sure that it's going to meet every standard that we set out, but it appears to move the action items up front where the public is here. It also considers the fact that you can't just come up with an agenda item in the middle of the meeting and expect the public to have the information that they need to act on it. So it meets those requirements, and so I'm going to make the recommended motion. I move to adopt Resolution 17-24.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. Councilmember Braden?
Thanks, Mayor. Anybody get Bagby's blessing on this?
Councilmember Marler.
On the agenda approval section at the beginning, I think it's at 6.1 big business, where you say matters not specifically listed on the agenda may be added. Now, is that different than the walk-ons that we've argued about back and forth a couple of times?
Yes, sir, that's exactly what that's for. Rather than walking an item on, whether it be staff or council, in the middle of a meeting and then opening up discussion, this would happen at the beginning of the meeting. With a supermajority vote, a council member would be able to place an agenda item on the agenda for discussion later on in the meeting. This affords any members of the public who are here to then know that this item will be discussed later on, and if they're interested to stay, they can then stay for that item. I did say that it's for those items that are considered emergency items, that we need to address them immediately, and we did not have knowledge of it prior to the closing for publishing of the agenda. Again, my recommendation, as always, is that if a council member wishes to discuss something and they did not make it onto the current agenda, I am more than happy to put it on the next agenda so that research can be done, so that the public can be notified in case they want to participate in that council meeting because of that agenda. So this would be for those emergency walk-on items that can't wait until the next agenda.
Okay, and this passes the public notice criteria that we have to have?
If it needs to be publicly noticed, sir, then you would not be able to walk it on.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any further discussion or comments. I call for the vote. Unanimous, yes? Resolution for National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Sandalwood Drive Drainage Award and Contract. Ms. Lejeune?
Yes, sir. Mr. David Campbell is going to introduce this item.
Sandalwood Drive was identified in our citywide stormwater management plan in 2004. It has been a historic area of flooding. It was one of the projects that we received the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, and we completed the design late last year. We put it out to bid recently. We received 3 qualified bids. We took those bids to the bid committee, where their recommendation was for Gulf Coast utility contractors to construct the project. The grant contains in excess of the $381,668.75 for this particular project, so there will be money for any contingency on this project. And staff would hope that City Council would look favorably upon this project.
Is there a discussion or a motion?
I'll make the recommendation.
Councilmember Braden?
No, okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. When you say that this contract is qualified, I hope you're talking more than this guy's doing in the bayou.
The contractor that is working on the Bayou didn't bid. The other 3 contractors, or the 3 contractors that we received bids from, we have done business with in the past. We're very familiar with their record. They're very good contractors.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Marler?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make the recommended motion. I move that the City Council authorize the City Manager to execute a contract with Gulf Coast Utility Contractors, Inc. for the Sandalwood Drive Drainage Improvement Project in the amount of $381,668.75.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion. We have 2 seconds. Any further discussion? Councilmember Ramsell?
Thanks. I have a question. Back in the contract for this project, it actually has 2 different Article 11s Is there a reason why there are two different ones covering two different territories rather than a sequential numbering?
There's no reason for that. We will, we'll take a look at that and make sure that that's taken care of.
It appears once as Article 11 as public records on page 114, and then Article 11 appears on a separate page by itself as public entity crimes on page 116.
It's a typo. We'll take care of that. Thank you.
Any further discussion, comment? Not, I call for the vote. Unanimous, yes. We'll move to the council comment section and begin with Mr. Morgan tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. I was discussing this with city manager. The first meeting in July is going to be July 3rd. I can't make that meeting. I know a lot of people are out of town. And I believe we have the ability to either change the date or just hold one meeting in July, which I'm okay with. It's not on the agenda. Could you do this by consensus or get it on the agenda next week?
Put it on the agenda next week.
Okay, so if you could put that on under my name, maybe. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. That's all I got. Thanks, Mayor.
I understand you cleaned up on the cobia fishing tournament. Didn't leave much else out there except for what the fish that Councilmember Dixon caught.
We got lucky. He did good. He came in second place in the Triple Crown. I'm not going to tell you who came in first place, so.
I'll say it's Chatham Morgan.
Councilmember Destin.
Thank you, Mayor. Not much tonight other than a general announcement to the public that we have a special meeting on this Wednesday evening, I believe at...
It's at 5:30 in
5:30.
the community center, and it is the West Florida Regional Planning Council facilitating the comp plan discussions.
I would encourage all members of the public who are interested in the future of development in Destin to show up. It's going to be a lively discussion, I'd imagine. So I'll leave that. Nothing else. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahler.
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I have is last meeting I used the date for the normal time that we would normally have the Founder's Day. However, I've erroneously said the first Saturday. It's actually going to be the second Saturday, which is the 13th for Founder's Day. So I encourage everyone to come out to Founder's Day and enjoy it. It's a great time to see some of the people who descendants of the people who originally helped found Destin, and including Mr. Destin's father and other family members. And I can tell your grandma congratulations on her birthday too. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Foreman.
I have nothing, Mayor.
Councilmember Dixon.
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Councilmember Ramswell.
Nothing tonight.
Councilmember Braden, we're on a roll. Nope.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Lejeune, will you provide us an alternative date for that meeting if we do have one that Mr. Morgan's talking about when it comes back next meeting? Was that part of your plan?
We can absolutely do that, sir.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Braden, you can also just have one meeting that month too, per the city code, only one's required, so.
Mr. Burns, you can just keep the floor.
Nothing further, Mayor.
Land Use Attorney.
Nothing, thank you.
We have the first reading of ordinance 17-10-CC, amendment to the delivery vessel regulation for restroom distance. Mr. Burns.
Ordinance number 17-10-CC, an ordinance of the City of Destin relating to delivery vessels, providing for additional findings of fact, providing for the amendment of section 13-145 general regulations / standards, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. And we're here on first reading.
Ms. Lejeune, explanation?
Yes, sir. I'm going to let Mr. Stephen Schmidt give the explanation for this item.
Yeah, we were requested to bring back a
a change to the livery vessel ordinance, which had been approved before, removing the 200-foot distance requirement for restrooms, and changing it to basically that restrooms be provided on the site. And this ordinance makes that very specific change.
Mr. Mayor, if we could ask somebody to turn that microphone off, you can't hear as well up here when it's on.
Councilmember Braden?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I'm going to make the recommended motion. I move that the City Council approve proposed ordinance 17-10-CC on first reading and direct staff to bring it back on second reading May 15th.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Discussion. Councilmember Braden? No, I'm sorry, Councilmember Marler?
Thank you, Mayor. Now, this ties in back with our porta potty thing a little bit, and the FEMA regulations for the boardwalk. So my question is, how can the livery vessel areas that don't have restroom facilities be able to put restroom facilities on their property, since FEMA does not allow anything without wheels? I know there are several properties that are currently trying to probably get restrooms. I haven't found out, but that's why I asked about the question about the wheeled porta potties.
The FEMA requirement is only for the floodplain, and the floodplain really doesn't cover 200 feet of those properties because of the elevation, the rise in elevation. So once you get 100 feet from the shoreline, you're typically at or close or above potentially the FEMA flood elevation, at which point you're not limited to FEMA requirements.
Okay, now, will that fall into place like with Destin water users? I know that we have to have lift stations at certain areas that lift it, because I think there's 3 different points that has to come from the harbor up. I'm just trying to make sure that if we're going to do with the livery thing, I just want to make sure we're not doing again what we're about permanent buildings on the harbor. I guess is where I'm going.
Of course, the FEMA regulations, the FEMA lines are changing in their new rollout. But the design for the Marler, or the park, basically has a building on it that had bathrooms in it that initially met the FEMA requirements for elevation. The lines moved up a little bit, and it doesn't, the new design, the design unchanged doesn't meet those new FEMA requirements anymore, but it's really not that much further up the hill. I'm not aware of any pump stations or anything that are currently in the FEMA flood zone, or that would, even for the park building, be constructed in the FEMA flood zone. You don't really have to get too far up that hill to get out of the FEMA flood elevation.
Okay, well, that adds to one more question, because at Harbor Walk, right next to Margaritaville, the water department has a lift station that I know it's probably grandfathered in, but it's at the FEMA line, I believe. I'm not really sure, because it would get flooded if we had a major storm. I'm just throwing that out there, but I just wanted to make sure that what we're doing here with the livery ordinance is not going to restrict somebody from doing their restrooms like we've asked them to do.
Any restrooms that need to be constructed obviously would be in the review process, would make sure that they weren't in the FEMA flood zone.
Okay, that's all.
Councilmember Ramsworth.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question that was brought up earlier by Mr. Stevens when he spoke. He had mentioned that there was a situation, I guess, where there are 2 parcels that are jointly owned by one owner to make it essentially one parcel, and yet I guess they're requiring 2 bathrooms, one for each parcel. Can someone shed some light on that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the site. It's the Luthers, and it actually currently operates from 2 contiguous properties under separate ownership. So that's a fairly unique situation, and I guess we'll really have to talk about how to address that. But under the current ordinance, each
each owner or each property is supposed to provide its own restroom. So the fact that there's one business operating on two separately owned properties is somewhat unique.
Yeah, I would think if they have all the permits and everything that's required and they're legally functioning across those two, personally, I think that's an issue to try to make them have two bathrooms, but of course it depends on code and what the regulations are.
The ordinance as written provides that, provides for a restroom on site, but also allows that with permission of an adjoining property owner that the business can use those as well. So as long as that business and those commercial restrooms can support the additional use, basically under the code, then presumably they can just provide approval by the adjoining owner to allow them to use those restrooms. So you could essentially, under the way the ordinance was written, you could essentially use one restroom on one of the two sites, but it would have to meet all of the requirements under the Land Development Code for multiple uses.
Okay, so now you are saying they could just have one that encompasses the two contiguous parcels as long as it's ADA compliant?
It's more than ADA compliant. There also takes into consideration the maximum usage, how many people would be. So let's say that we have the two parcels. One does not have a restroom, is being required to build a restroom. The other one has a restroom, but perhaps that restroom that's already there is only for that particular business that's going on. You now combined the two businesses, because it's one business, Luther, but they have two locations. So now you're doing the location for A and the location for B now is impacting that commercial restroom that's already in effect for that commercial entity. So if the capacity cannot meet all the additional usage, then that business owner is going to have to expand their commercial restroom to meet that capacity.
Okay, and those standards are set out within our code or the state code or whichever one's applicable? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I voted no last time, and I don't think asking for brick and mortar restrooms or requiring brick and mortar restrooms is asking too much of a business. Again, I think it is the cost of doing business. But one of the things that I'm somewhat frustrated with was this went through, our CRA board. It was vetted several times. I think there was a workshop with all the livery vessel owners, and we passed the regulation. I think it came up at 4 meetings because we sent it back, it came back, and now it's here in front of us again. I don't know. I'm just disappointed we're talking about it still.
Councilmember Dixon.
Yes, we're talking about leases. Those leases come and go. So if we don't, if we say that you can utilize this one restroom and basically that lease goes away, then what are we going to do on the side where the lease is still in effect? So, I don't know how we get around that, but I do know that we can't keep tailoring this ordinance to every unique situation that would be on the harbor. It just won't work like that. So, I'm all about trying to get something on the books. If it's not perfect, we can tune it in a little later, but we keep going down this road, and as I said, everybody has a unique situation, and if we try to address every unique situation, we'll never get this done. So that's my comment.
No further discussion. Please help me. We did have a motion and a second. If no further discussion, I call for the vote. 1 no, 6 yes. Passes. We have the first reading of our temporary tree cutting moratorium. Mr. Burns, by title, please.
Ordinance number 17-11-CN, an ordinance enacting a temporary moratorium on the removal of protected trees within the Destin city limits, pending consideration of changes to city ordinances, providing definitions, providing for a temporary moratorium on permits allowing removal of certain trees, providing for exceptions, providing for appeals, providing for penalties, and providing for an effective date and term.
Ms. Lejeune, explanation.
Yes, sir. I'm going to ask Ms. Karen Haynes to address the moratorium for us, please.
Staff was asked to bring back a moratorium for your consideration this evening. It is for the removal of certain tree species under certain circumstances, which are laid out in the text of the moratorium. I'll highlight several components. Section 2 would require no removal of trees, of the specified trees, under the conditions of the various types of development permits and building permits. And also does include instances where the consideration of a construction of a single-family residential home, you can remove trees in order to build that. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Councilmember Destin.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I believe it was Ms. Moore brought up the homestead exemption, and that is a sort of a thorny issue for everybody, since most of the land that probably makes up a big chunk of Destin belongs to the citizens that vote us in, and I understand that that's sort of an accommodation to not really upset people. But at the same time, you know, I know that probably Mr. Braden and some of the other folks who have been hot on this issue saw that at the corner of Kelly and Spring Lake, we had several very large oak trees removed, and that was partially in the right-of-way, but it was adjacent to land that was a single family homestead. So is there a way that we could proceed with this moratorium but delete the homestead language, but at the same time, I don't want to just literally hamstring someone who is trying to build a home and they happen to have a live oak that sits directly in the middle of their property from being able to proceed?
Yes, sir. We have that language, what you're talking about for the footprint. If you look under number 4, I believe, it says that removal is approved as part of issuance of a building construction permit for the residents. The removal does not occur until after the building construction permit is posted, notice of commencement is recorded, and only those qualifying trees may be removed as are necessary to reasonably accommodate the approved building site plan, including only building footprint, utilities, and access and drainage. And that was based on a conversation where several council members felt that it was not right to keep a person from building a home on their property if there was a big tree in the way of the footprint. The other item, the next one, number 5, removal of any trees from a homesteaded single-family property occupied by the owner, that is an exemption that we were asked to put in by council. If council votes to take it out, then we will take it out.
Yeah, I'd seen that language. I mean, I can make a recommended motion, and I'll probably ask that number 5 be removed, but before I make that recommended motion and send us down a rabbit trail of having to have a vote and then perhaps having a secondary vote, I'd ask for sort of some discussion and consensus from the council if they felt that was something that they felt passionately about too.
Councilmember Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Destin, and you know, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've seen lots clear cut in Destin for a long time, and I really want to save my argument so I don't bore y'all for when we actually have the tree ordinance in front of us. And I will do that. Hey, is there a way that we can add southern magnolia to the protected tree species without sending it back to first reading?
No, it'd have to go back to first reading, and also striking number 5 will put it back to
Okay,
first
well,
reading.
Southern magnolias are the most prevalent magnolias we have in Destin. You know, the one that's on here is really not that prevalent, so those are the big magnolia trees. So I'd like to see that added if and when Parker makes a motion.
Councilmember Braden.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I have my facts about 98% correct. If I do not, somebody please correct me, but the parcel that comes to mind with me with the homestead is the parcel down on Calhoun. I'm almost positive that parcel was homesteaded, was sold, but right before it closed, all those 200-300-year oak trees were taken out. I'm talking about the parcel that we own now that the park's going on. So that piece of property was homesteaded. At the time, those huge trees were cut down. That's what bothers me. I mean, I hate to say somebody that's homesteaded and, you know, if you got a tree in your yard, you can't cut it down. But that's the only part that worries me, and if you don't do it, then that portion's not covered. If somebody else has got a homesteaded, you know, that could happen again, is only my concern. That's all, Mayor.
Councilmember Foreman.
Thank you, Mayor. What my concern is that we're talking about a moratorium that is in place for 6 months. If we make the changes to the first reading tonight, we're going back to first reading, which is another meeting, which means that at some point in time, we got to put something in writing and do something about it. I don't know how many homesteaders in a 6-month period of time would cut a live oak tree down. But, you know, or attempt to do that. I think the important thing to me is to get something done, especially a moratorium, if we're going to do it. If not, forget it and let's get on with the ordinance and finish it and put that in effect and then have the penalties associated with it. But this equivocating is probably the worst thing we can do. The size of the lots in the city of Destin, for the most part, don't accommodate a lot of live oaks unless you've got a plantation. And so, you know, I'm just saying, I'm weighing the risk of not changing it against the risk of not doing something.
Councilmember Foreman, y'all could pass the current moratorium draft and then come back in 2 meetings and amend it. And so then you would have a moratorium in place sooner. It just wouldn't be perfect how they've suggested tonight. And that might be an alternative to amending it tonight.
Councilmember Dixon.
I've heard the argument about the fact that, you know, you're talking about private property and the people's trees and things like that. And you know, I would argue the fact that, you know, that your neighbors and our citizens are, you know, have a little bit of right to that view and to those trees. So, you know, I would say that it would probably be a good idea for tonight. Let's go ahead and get this thing adopted, and then maybe we can, as we said just a little bit ago, in the next couple of meetings, we can tune in on it, however it is, it needs to be tuned in. But I think to delay this is, I worry about what's going on, and I did notice this on Kelly Street, that the more we talk about this and the more people see this, the more people are rushing out to start whacking down their trees. And I do worry about that. I think some of that's already gone on. So I'm ready to move forward with this thing tonight, and if we need to amend it or whatever it is, we can amend it down the road.
Councilmember Ramsell.
Thank you. My concern is we have this whole section, Section 4, on penalties and what we're going to do if this happens, if that happens. However, if you go to the very front agenda item, it says effect on budget. There are no funds currently budgeted for enforcement of this ordinance. So here we have a whole set of things that we want to do, but there's no teeth because we don't have the money to have anyone to do anything. So what's the point? I mean, it's very frustrating to me.
I do think, if somebody is cutting down trees, in this case, in this moratorium, in the right-of-way, you file a code complaint, and they come investigate it. That's how just a code enforcement officer doing their normal job was how I envision a tree, the penalties being enforced in the first place.
And I see that, but that puts the onus on the passerby, the citizen, that's not how it should be.
Well, for just case in point, the Kelly and Beach Street trees, after we were made aware, staff was made aware, we did send our code enforcement folks out to investigate. They did find out who cut down the tree, and we did notice them with a violation, and they now need to come before special magistrate. Of course, the tree is now gone. How we would actually prevent someone from cutting down a tree in advance, I don't know how to do that. Now, if someone is in the process of cutting down a tree and we're notified, we will go out and put a stop work order on it. We can do that. We can make them stop cutting it down if they're in the process of it. But we do not have the staff to consistently patrol the entire city to make sure that there's nobody who's getting ready to cut down a tree.
But with that said, is not our code enforcement charged with patrolling, for lack of a better word, the streets of Destin and seeing what's going on and being aware?
I understand that, and if I had a staff of 10, that would be something that we would do. I have a staff of 3. We answer complaints. We go out because we get so many complaints on a daily basis. Those 3 staff members are out only dealing with complaints at this point in time.
We need to make this something for discussion for budget or visioning or something, all of the above, because this is unacceptable to have, I'm not blaming you, of course, but it's unacceptable to have things on the books that we're supposed to be enforcing and yet we can't.
Councilmember Destin, you have a motion?
Yeah, I've got a motion, and I'm going to say one thing before I make the motion, since I'm going to limit myself to 2, since we don't want these meetings going on forever, right? So we've often talked about in politics, how do you get people to do the right thing on the front end, instead of saying you shall not cut down a tree, you shall leave this live oak alone. And again, we're on the back end. After the tree's gone, there's not a whole lot you can do other than, fine them, they get in trouble. And then you hope sort of the word spreads, that if you get caught, you're going to get in trouble. But we want it to be a little bit more, in a democracy, you need to be a little bit more proactive, I think, with incentives. And like she said, what are the incentives? There is not a whole lot that I've been able to sit and think about, but to a certain extent, what about landscaping credits? There are landscaping requirements that come along with even residential property. What about landscaping requirements? If somebody's got a 200-year-old live oak in their front yard that all of us think that we want preserved, how do we incentivize that landowner to keep it if they're not necessarily a tree lover? Well, you give them some credits with regard to the landscaping requirements. I mean, there are creative ways to come and try to incentivize people. There's corollaries perhaps on the commercial side if we could calibrate it correctly. And it gets us away from sort of these decrees that we say you can't do this and you can't do that. Those are my thoughts on it for right now. I don't really want to send us back to the first reading process, but I do understand, it's kind of raw, the fact that a lot of, I think, what Tuffy was talking about with, people seeing, oh my gosh, the barn door's getting shut, we better cut our trees down as quick as we can, and we're seeing it in some places around town, So I think maybe I'll just go with the original motion, and if you give me just a moment, I'll find it.
Page 120. 126.
Yeah. There we go. I move that the City Council approve proposed ordinance 17-11-CN on first reading and direct the staff to schedule proposed ordinance 17-11-CN for public hearing and final adoption on second reading.
Second. We have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? If not, I call for the vote. Unanimous, yes. Ms. Lejeune, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. We received from the Okaloosa County League of Cities Executive Board a proposed resolution regarding the referendum for a levy of an additional half-cent sales tax for a period of 5 years to fund capital improvement projects. The Okaloosa County League of Cities is asking if at this time the City Council would support such a resolution that they would then be bringing forward to the Board of County Commissioners for Okaloosa County to see if they would be willing to approve it to be placed on the voter referendum. The information we received was that it would be for the November 2017 election. Now, if there's any other election being discussed now at this time, it's not the original information that we were given. So I can't speak to whether it would be November 2017 or March 2018, as was put in the paper. The Okaloosa League of Cities asked us for a support for putting a referendum on for the November 2017. At this point, this is strictly a City Council decision, if you wish to support it or if you wish to take no action regarding this.
I'm the representative for the Destin Council to this organization, Okaloosa County League of Cities. This was brought up at the most recent meeting that to discuss the possibility of bringing this sales tax proposal to all the cities. There are several cities that are very strongly for it. I think many are a little bit weaker. As you may know, the school board dropped out originally in a previous election. The school board was a part of this. We were asked to bring this to our city councils and discuss it. I told the organization that I would not bring it nor recommend it to the Destin City Council for several reasons. If you'll look at the schedule of the monies collected and how they're to be distributed among the various cities, once again, Destin is, once again, the monies are primarily being distributed by population, and I felt that that was very unequitable to the city of Destin. The southeast corner of this county is the largest contributor to the taxes and the sales tax base, and we would be receiving, I believe, about 6.5%, if I estimated this correctly, of the revenues back. We'd be paying substantially more than that, probably substantially over 50%. I felt that if the cities really wanted to do this, we should arrive at a more equitable split. They, of course, want to do it based on year-round residents and not include in the expenses that we have for the 50, 60,000 visitors on any given week throughout the city of Destin that are not full-time residents, part-time owners, and of course we have many properties, large developments down here that are not part of the city and not part of the split. That money would go to the county. But I refuse to recommend this to you all based on them refusing to create an equitable split of the revenues. Also, my second reasoning was much as the Chamber of Commerce presented earlier this evening, we didn't seem to have really specifics of how the money was to be spent. I certainly knew that the City Council has great needs for money. We've got a road that needs to be built. There's other things that need to be done in Destin. We can utilize the funds, but that was kind of putting the cart before the horse, wanting to create the tax and then go out and find a way to spend it. And I did not feel comfortable presenting that, and apparently the chamber didn't feel comfortable with it as well. But it created a very lively debate, as you can well imagine. It was kind of a minority of one. I received a little support from a couple of the other cities, but very little. They did inform me that they thought they could pass this without Destin's help. And so it led to a very lively debate, but I wanted to lay that before you consider this. I'm not recommending that we'd refuse to participate or go along. I would feel more comfortable if we simply did not vote to support it. But I don't get to vote, it's your job. Councilmember Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I've tried the whole raising taxes and it didn't go well here, which is funny because the ad valorem rate we proposed and what we ended up settling on, I'm going to pay substantially less in ad valorem taxes than what I'm going to pay in my extra half-cent sales tax based on what I spend. So this is actually a far higher tax hike than what we proposed earlier, and you saw the outcry that brought about. So on that, but you know, if the school board proposed a tax hike, I would, a half cent, full cent, whatever, I would completely support it. I have no issue paying a little extra for our schools, but what I do have an issue is continuing to subsidize the other cities and Okaloosa County, and seeing an inequitable share of those revenues returned to us. For example, we would pay 40–50% of this sales tax would be collected by my, as a business owner, I can't support this. As a citizen of Destin, I can't support this. And a representative of Destin citizens, I can't support this. And why should I collect an extra half cent from my customers at my 5 restaurants in town when my city will collect 50% of the tax, but we'll receive 6.6% of the money? So the reason why they think that they can pass this without Destin support is because it's a really easy sell to the people in Niceville and Fort Walton and Crestview and the Okaloosa County Commissioners. Let's, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul again. We're going to fleece Destin. They're going to pay 50% of this money, and they'll get 6.6%, and we're going to get all the rest. It'd be an easy sell if I were a Niceville council member or county commissioner from Crestview. That's an easy sell. So while we could certainly use the money because we are in the bottom 3% or whatever of ad valorem rates in this state, you know, and we could desperately need the money unless they came up with a laundry list that proved, you know, with the county will receive over 50% of all the funds. If the county could give us a laundry list showing that, hey, you know, you're not going to get 50% of the projects, but you'll get 20, 30%, something that we could settle on. I could swallow that, but I can't swallow 6% of the money to see projects funded in the north end of the county, in the west end of the county. You know, it's a redistribution of the wealth that Destin generates. You know, and here we are in Okaloosa County, the just hotbed of conservatism, and let's redistribute Destin's wealth, be it through ad valorem taxes or half a cent sales tax. I would welcome the school board bringing a sales tax, though, but not this.
I failed to point out that I did point out to the group that that they were more than willing to pick the three smallest cities in the county and double the amount they're going to get, because they're small and don't get a lot of money.
Well,
So they'll double theirs.
I can get behind Laurel Hill, but I can't get behind Crestview.
Well, I thought Destin, we counted as 12,898 people. We're not in the smaller half, but we're one of the smaller one. I double ours too, but I got nowhere with that. Councilmember Destin.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think the one thing we've got going for us, I mean, this is just really whether or not we want to recommend a referendum. We don't get to choose. It's going to be the general voters that are going to choose. And as Mr. Moody pointed out, these things tend to have a propensity to crash and burn when you don't have a laundry list of exactly how you're going to spend the money, exactly where the excess is going to go. You know, this is a hotbed of conservatism, and honestly, people's gut reactions is no new taxes, not no, but you know what, no. And you lose them before you can even tell them that, hey, listen, we're going to redistribute. You're from Crestview. Destin's going to make all the money and you're going to get all the benefit. They're like, no, I still don't want to even pay. You know, that's kind of how things go. I can't support just given, it's not even the inequitable distributions, the fact that there's no accountability within the framework of how we're going to spend this money. And I get it, there are certain projects that could be spent in the west end of the county, in the north end of the county. I want Niceville to fix its stormwater system, because every time Rocky Bayou has another sewer break and it goes into the water system out there, and the chloroform goes through, or the fecal chlor, I think it's fecal, anyways, it's fecal bacteria numbers go through the roof. All that water flushes right out through our pass and sends our numbers up. So we are incentivized for Niceville to get their act together from a stormwater standpoint. If that money could be used for that, I could get behind that. But without an itemized list, I have no guarantees that that's going to occur. So this is just a recommendation to send it to a referendum, and I don't think I can support it at this time.
In fairness, their intent, their next move would be to try to come up with a fair list of capital expenditures before this actually became a formal proposition.
And I'd like to see that list, but they need to give me the list before they ask for my recommendation.
And if we did support it, that's the next thing they're going to ask us for, is what we're going to do with it. Councilmember Foreman.
There are pros and cons of this. I think that isn't the distribution determined by the state?
Yes.
It's a statutory thing. It's not something that's done at the local level. That's number one.
It's not locked in. There's ways around that, and that's how they're doubling the amount of money the smaller communities are getting. It's not strictly required to be population.
Is it or is it not statutory?
You want to?
It is statutory.
Okay.
It can be varied.
That's the answer. Okay.
It can be varied through an interlocal agreement.
That's the answer. It isn't done, if you go to the gas tax, it's done the same way. We don't get the percentage, we get the percentage according to our population. So we're not going to change that under any circumstance. And secondly, if let's say the referendum does approve it, then that money comes directly to us for our projects, however we determine that. That's not something that's going to be determined in Niceville or some other city. So first of all, are we saying that we're just on principle going to turn this down? And the second part of it is, some years ago, the school system put together a half-cent sales tax. What they did was exactly what Mr. Moody has talked about here, is that they had a specific list of projects, schools that they wanted to upgrade and to do something about, and it passed. So it's not impossible to do. I'm just saying that I'm as upset as you are, especially sitting on the TDC and other things, that I can sit there and see that we're not getting our fair share. But the question is, do we want to just arbitrarily turn down a user tax that is going to help us out in an area that we cannot afford with our capital improvements taxes? I can think of undergrounding of utilities. I can think of the cross connector. I can think of a number of things that might be useful to us if we had those funds. So I guess what I'm thinking is that once again, I have to hold my nose on something like this, but most of it is being paid by, not necessarily by the residents. I assume the residents are paying at least half of it, but, your tourists are paying it, visitors, other people like that. But it sunsets in 5 years. But I think there are reasons to think about it and not just arbitrarily say no. I'm not saying, there should be any other reason, but that's my position.
I'm not arbitrarily saying no. I'm saying no because I'm going to collect an extra $50,000 from my customers, and only $3,000 are going to stay in my community. I'm saying no based on a deep-seated principle that's wrong, And if the county had a list that showed, hey, we're going to do more for you, fine. I'd support it.
I try not to ever do this in the middle of a discussion, but let's take a quick 5-minute break. Council members, we start heading toward the dais. We'll get this meeting going again. Mr. Foreman, I forgot to look at the clock. Is my 10 minutes about up?
Almost together, right?
Could I ask everyone to please start returning to their seats? Could we have order, please? I'd like to reopen the meeting. Councilmember Ramsel, you gonna start us off?
Thanks. I did want to clarify that the distribution by population is by Florida state statute, and actually, the way they have done this, where they have actually doubled the proportionate share for Cinco Bayou, Laurel Hill, and Shalimar, was done by the Okaloosa County League of Cities with a joint agreement way back when they first did the gas tax and the sales tax consideration. So that's how that came about. It's not a new thing. With that said, I think we all know how I feel about inequitable distribution of funds. I've spoken at length about the TDC. In my opinion, this would be no different. You're taking in a massive amount that Destin's population, people staying here, living here, working here, whatever, are contributing, and then it's going to be dispersed amongst the county. And I think probably what bothers me the most is that the county is going to be taking 57%. Now, I liked Mr. Moody's suggestion. He was talking about, well, you know, this essentially it could be inevitable, but his suggestion in terms of why don't we work at getting at the table with Okaloosa County and saying, look, you know, we all recognize that Destin's probably going to be putting in at least 50%, probably more. Can we get a say on some of the projects? Can we have a seat at the table and maybe discuss some of these things? That may be the path forward, because as Mr. Foreman mentioned, you know, unfortunately, when you do look at population, and if this goes to a countywide vote, well, Destin's population of 12,900-ish, you know, compared with the whole rest of the county, I think even if a 99% voter turnout for Destin isn't going to change the outcome of an election, unless folks just don't want to have another tax. So we do need to be, at least, I think, thinking of a project that could be earmarked for this, because whether we want it or we don't want it, however we feel about it, if the county approves it, the countywide vote in a referendum, we do need to be prepared. So that's something I think for us to indeed keep in mind.
Councilmember Braden.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had, was thinking about when Councilman Destin was talking about how this thing, you know, may be dead on arrival, and people talk about, they don't want tax, period. When I went through my for the recount when I was elected, I went to Crestview and sat there and watched all the ballots go through the machine being sent back through and recounted. It was unbelievable to me the amount of ballots that were filled out. At that time, the fire department was wanting a tax. And it was impressive, the amount of people that showed up to vote and only voted no for that tax and didn't even vote for a council member. That was the only mark on that whole ballot, was just no. So it's pretty impressive how people, those tax, and it may be dead on arrival, but my thought is, what I like to see us do is just take, the staff's recommendation, just take no action at all on it. That's all I have.
Councilmember Morgan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's certain people in the county that are saying that this is an effort to keep property taxes low, which you could raise our property taxes by $1 million in the county, and I would still spend more with the half-cent sales tax. So it's a bait and switch. It's not an effort to keep it low. I'll pay just as much out of my pocket with the half-cent sales tax than I would with an extra $1 million on my ad valorem. So it's not about property taxes, it's about taking Destin's money.
I see no further discussion, no motions, no seconds. Shall we adjourn the meeting and just leave it as, public comment, excuse me. No, I cannot adjourn. Yes.
I just had one more announcement. Okay.
Please. I'm sorry, you do have the floor.
Okay, so our next meeting is May 15th. Prior to that, we have 2 strategic planning workshops with the council on May 11th and May 12th. They'll both be held at the Calhoun Room at our public library. May 11th, it'll start at 1 o'clock and go till 5, and then May 12th, it'll be from 9 to 5 all day. It is strategic planning, and the council is invited to attend.
The floor is now open to the public to discuss anything you wish to discuss. Please stand and be seen. Give your name and address when you come to the podium, and please turn the mic on for us.
Hello, my name is Carrie Harbarger. Thanks for hearing me. Am I loud? My ears are clogged, sorry. Okay, this is way out in left field. Y'all, something I've talked to other council members about, and it's dear to my heart. It's going to be way out in left field, so I'm just going to say it. It's been on me for 7 years. When the BP oil spill came here, we ended up on oil on our sea buoy out there. I have surveyed this, and I can get thousands of signatures if I have to, but I would like to see if the city council would endorse or stand behind me when I ask the Coast Guard to please replace our sea buoy back to the way it was traditionally for our whole lives. We had a whistle buoy our whole lives growing up here. It's gone. We want it back. They actually should have asked us what we wanted. I know this is trivial to some, but if you're born and raised here or you're from here, it's not. So I would like the endorsement of the city council, or perhaps a letter or something, because I will be addressing this. I'm going to call a meeting and see what we can do about it. They have the BP funds, and I don't know how that's going to work or how it can be funded, but I'd like to see them put it back the way they ruined it. That's all.
Thank you. Any other member of the...
I'm here. Marcy Bell, Holiday Isle. So I just learned on Friday that we have a parcel in our city that is being used for commercial business, and it's a residential lot. And I would like to ask the council how they would like to address this issue, because I'm in a residential zone, and I guess that means I can open up a commercial business and do whatever I want. I'm not real sure. I don't really know how to approach that, but yeah. And I would also like to say that that particular lot, I believe, should be conservation, so no matter if it's conservation or residential, commercial business doesn't belong as a business on that parcel at all. Thank you.
Yes.
If I could, I had heard from some folks, so I had an inkling that this was going to come up this evening. All of you that attend our meetings.
Excuse me just one sec.
Real quick, just before you go on, if you do say anything, Councilman Ramswell, I just got to caution the council. There are, I've been informed there are some active code enforcement cases against that parcel regarding this issue, and the council cannot interfere in that process and provide, and so I just caution any comments that you're going to make based upon that.
Right, understood.
Just to clarify, there's not an active code enforcement case yet. There's just been complaints received that will be investigated.
And the way it was explained to me by the city manager earlier, it means there's an active administrative process. There's been complaints made. It's in process.
So with that said, I think that probably anyone that's been involved in city business at all in the last couple of years has noticed that a particular item, parcel B, has come up multiple times. At one of our past meetings, and Mr. Dana Matthews represents the owner of the parcel, he said, I think perhaps in jest, perhaps the city should look at eminent domain. Well, it actually kind of planted something in my head, and I thought, you know what, one thing that we're always seeking is additional beach access for the public. Wouldn't this be a great opportunity if we could work together and purchase the property for public beach access? And so I reached out to Mr. Matthews, who reached out to his client. I've also spoken with our land use attorney. And so at this time, I'd like to ask if our land use attorney could be a designee to initiate and have some discussions with Mr. Matthews about the potential for obtaining that parcel.
If that is the directive of the city council, then we can proceed in that manner.
Council, thoughts? I see lots of wheels spinning. Mr. Matthews, did you want to make a comment or?
Dana Matthews, local attorney. I represent Destin Parcel B LLC that owns 11.77 acres on the pass. Ms. Ramswell called me a couple weeks ago and asked me whether my client would be interested in selling that parcel. I said, I have no idea. I said, I will find out and we'll call you back. I've talked to my client and he's authorized me to represent that he will entertain a dialogue with the city, and I suggested that if that take place, then it should come before the full council for a decision on whether they wanted to entertain a dialogue, and if so, who they wanted to appoint to be the person that I would have opportunity to discuss that with. That's how we left it. Thank you.
I'd say make a motion.
Since this is sort of a walk-on, I would still vote to set aside the order of the day and then move to appoint Ms. Cobb at that point.
One last time.
Could I have a motion to set aside the order of the day if we want to proceed with this?
So moved.
Are we going to get it a chance to be examined before we do this?
What's to examine? You got to have the dialogue first.
This is just to have discussions, not tonight. This is for whomever we designate, be it our land use attorney or city manager, whomever, just to have conversations and then report back to us. It's nothing for tonight. No, we have to tell them that we approve of them having discussions.
Can we not just put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
Put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
That would also be safe to do that way.
Gives the staff time to do some fact finding.
We'll leave it at that. Any other comments from the public? Not seeing any? We're adjourned.